Episode 1. Joe takes a holiday. This season opens up with Joe starting a new life in Paris and also trying to find Marianne, who fled the country at the end of the season 3. He discovers she is an artist, and he uses that knowledge to track her down. Marianne looks terrified of Joe, and Joe realizes she doesn't want anything to do with him, so he lets her leave. Joe then goes to a bar where he runs into Elliot, who was a man hired to kill Joe by the Quinn family. But Elliot doesn't kill him and just gives Joe a new identity to use and tells him he can't come back to the States. Joe's new name in Europe is Jonathan Moore, and Elliot tells Joe he must kill Marianne though, as she knows everything, and Joe says he will do it, but he actually doesn't. He can't bring himself to kill the woman he loves. Joe gets a new job as a professor of literature at a local university. Joe lives next to Malcolm, one of his colleagues, and almost immediately, Joe falls in love with Malcolm's girlfriend, Kate, at first sight. Joe saves her from a mugging one night, and she thanks him. Joe attends a party with Malcolm and is pretty turned off by all the narcissism there. The only person Joe connects with is Reese, the future mayor of London, and they connect because they both have sketchy childhoods. They get pretty drunk, and the next thing Joe is waking up in the morning with Malcolm lying dead on the kitchen floor, and Joe has no recollection of what happened. Joe disposes of the body just in case he was the one who did it. He then goes back to the Sundry house to return the coat, and he connects with Reese once again. The next day, Joe runs into Kate, who invites him out to dinner with the other club members. On his way to the dinner, Joe receives a text from an anonymous number who claims to be Malcolm's killer. He obviously thinks the true murderer is someone from the Sundry House group, and they may be framing him for murder. But who could it be? Episode 2. Portrait of the Artist. The episode begins with Joe wondering why anyone would try framing him for murder. He makes sure there aren't any bugs or cameras in his home that could have captured him disposing of the body. Joe thinks Kate may be behind this, so he follows her and sees if she is the one texting him, but he is unable to find any proof Kate is behind her boyfriend's murder. At the university, one of Joe's favorite students, Nadia, comes to talk to him about murder mystery novels, as those are her favorite genre, and it's like a very meta conversation because Joe is trying to get to the bottom of his current murder mystery by thinking how a writer would write a murder mystery novel. Joe thinks Elliot may be the culprit, but Elliot denies doing such a thing, and then Joe receives another message which insinuates he's being followed, and they know about Joe's dirty past. Joe continues getting close with the Sundry Club members, as that is his best way to find out the true killer, and he comes to learn not many people in the club really like Malcolm all that much, so Joe easily thinks it is one of them. Malcolm was only part of the group because he dated Kate, and she was the one they really liked. Joe sneaks into Malcolm's office, and he finds a bunch of dirt which insinuates Malcolm was blackmailing a few of their friends for money. Apparently, the club owner Adam was getting the worst of it, and Adam hated Malcolm for it. Joe starts following Adam around town until Adam's bodyguard, Vic, catches Joe, and Joe is forced to pay Vic off to not say anything. At an event, Joe talks with Adam a bit, and Joe gets the vibes that Adam didn't do it. Kate has started working with Joe to find out where Malcolm could be, and he is pretty much just using this as a way to get close to her and act like he cares for her feelings. Joe then has a realization that he thinks Simon is the murderer because Malcolm was blackmailing Simon for stealing others' art and passing it off as his own. That theory is proven wrong, as Simon is the next victim of the killer. When Joe gets home, he finds a ton of newspaper articles referencing all of the murders that have happened in Joe's past, and this person obviously knows a lot more about Joe than he thought. The killer tells Joe he knows his true identity. Episode 3. Eat the Rich. Joe takes everything down and stops responding to the killer and hopes it will just disappear. In retaliation for this, the killer sends Joe Malcolm's finger that he had removed in the first episode and tells Joe if he keeps ignoring him, things will just get worse. Malcolm's death is soon revealed to the public in the front page of the newspaper, and the press is labeling it a serial killer that goes by the name the Eat the Rich Killer, and Malcolm and Simon's deaths were related. The police then arrive at Joe's apartment because that was one of the last places Malcolm was seen alive, but Joe tells him he was there and Malcolm left pretty early in the night. Joe attends Simon's funeral, and he can tell every rich person in attendance is scared to death because they may be next. Reese gives a speech at the funeral, which makes Joe wonder if Reese could have been the one to do this. I mean, he is the next mayor, and if Malcolm had serious dirt on him, that could ruin his whole campaign. Kate and Joe then start getting close together as she is grieving the loss of Malcolm and wants a shoulder to cry on. Joe finds a love letter in Malcolm's room that was from Nadia, his star student. She was in love with her other professor. Kate catches him in the act and tells him to leave. A little later, Joe follows Kate when she goes to Malcolm's grave, and while creeping on her, Vic was stalking him and confronts him. Vic accuses Joe of being the killer because none of this happened until he showed up in town and at the club. Joe then strangles Vic as he has no other choice if he doesn't want to be arrested. He then buries Vic in Simon's tomb. Joe messages the killer and tells him they both have killed recently and he wants to meet face to face. They agree to meet in the coming days. Joe gets a message from Phoebe to meet at the Sundry house, and whenever he gets there, he is met by the whole club and 2 police officers wanting to speak with Joe. Episode 4. Hampsie. Joe is interrogated by the cops, but it is pretty obvious that they have no idea what is going on and who is doing these killings. They are only there at the Sundry house to interview every club member, as they seem to be the targeted victims of the Eat the Rich killer. Joe is then invited by the group to head to Phoebe's family's vacation house in the Hamptons. Joe wants to go because he is under the belief the killer will be there as well. At the house, Joe is put in the room right next to Kate, which he is happy about because he wants to apologize for snooping around in her house without permission. One of the other guys, Rold, is extremely in love with Kate, and he doesn't like Joe at all because he feels Joe will take her away from him ever having a chance. Joe wonders if Rold is the killer, and that would actually make a ton of sense. Joe finds pictures of Kate in Rold's room when he sneaks in. Joe goes into action to find any proof he can that Rold is the Eat the Rich killer. Rold catches Joe and throws him through the window. Then out of nowhere, Joe hears a scream, and it was Kate, and when he goes to make sure she is all right, he finds Kate with blood all over her and Gemma's dead body on the floor. At first glance, Joe thinks Kate is the killer, but then he realizes that is way too easy and the killer wouldn't just give themselves up like that. He now knows it wasn't Rold either, as Rold was too busy throwing Joe out the window when the killing most likely happened. Joe tells Kate he will help her and he knows she didn't do this, but he knows whoever is the killer, they are there with them. Episode 5. The Fox and the Hound. Joe tells Kate that he will help her move the body, and Kate finds it odd that he is so willing to help cover up a murder, and she starts to wonder if maybe he wasn't the one who did this. They start wrapping up the body, and then Phoebe barges in, but Kate is quickly able to tell Phoebe to leave so they can continue disposing of the body. They toss the body out of the window and take it out to an animal larder where other animal corpses are kept. Kate then holds a knife up at Joe and demands to tell her why he is so calm disposing of a body, and Joe tells her about finding Malcolm's body in his home and how he has been getting blackmailed by the killer, and Kate believes him. A little later, Kate realizes that she dropped her bracelet while moving the body, and she asks Joe to go back and look for it. When she goes upstairs, she is met by Phoebe, who has discovered all of the blood spots on the carpet in the bedroom. Kate tells Phoebe the truth, and Phoebe tells all the employees of the grounds to go home. While Joe goes back to get the bracelet, he is confronted by Rold, who is plastered drunk. Rold then tells everyone there that Joe is the Eat the Rich killer, but they are all too stoned and high to care what he has to say. Rold is a hunter and he gives Joe the chance to flee, but after 5 minutes, he is going to come hunt him down and kill Joe. In the woods, they get in a fight with each other, but then Reese shows up out of nowhere and knocks them both out. They both wake up tied up in the basement. Reese reveals himself as the Eat the Rich killer, and he tells Joe they could be dangerous partners, killing all of the rich, egotistical people in the country. Joe isn't about it, so Reese tells him so be it and leaves them tied up in the basement and starts a fire. Kate frees both of them before they die, but the whole house goes up in flames. But now Joe knows his target, and he is the future mayor of London. Episode 6. Best of Friends. This episode opens with Joe trying to figure a way to kill Reese without being caught, but he knows how hard it is going to be to murder a public political figure. Joe learns from Nadia that Reese does the same jog every Saturday, and Joe feels like that will be his best opportunity to take Reese out. Feel like every season so far, Joe has killed someone while they were out on a jog, or at least put them in the hospital. Some things never change. Joe confronts him, but Reese tells Joe he doesn't want to be enemies and he wants to be friends with him. Reese says that Malcolm, Simon, and Gemma all deserved what happened to them as they were terrible people. He thinks of himself as Dexter, I guess. Reese wants to frame someone else for all the killings, and then Joe and Reese can go on with their murderous lives. At a celebration party, a person dressed up as a cop talks to Phoebe and convinces her to come up to a hotel room for her own safety. Her name is Dawn, and she is like a stage 5 clinger for Phoebe and truly thinks they are best friends, even though Phoebe barely even knows her. Nadia notices Phoebe leaving with this woman, and she tells Joe about it. The police then show up and arrest Dawn for kidnapping charges. The next day in the newspaper, an article is released that Dawn is very likely the Eat the Rich killer, but Nadia doesn't seem to buy it at all. She didn't get murderer vibes from Dawn, but she is starting to think Joe may be behind everything going on. In the meantime, Kate and Joe end up hooking up together even though she knows about his rocky past, but she doesn't want to let the past dictate the future. After their adult time, Joe goes back to his flat to see Reese sitting on his couch. Apparently, the Eat the Rich killer isn't done, and Reese wants Joe's help in killing Kate's father, Tom Lockwood. Episode 7. Good Man, Cruel World. Joe doesn't know what to do about his current situation as he and Kate have started legitimately dating, and she even wants to introduce him to her father that will be coming into town soon. Kate warns Joe that her dad can come off as very rude and obtrusive, but is very charismatic when you get to really know him. At dinner, when Kate heads to the restroom, Tom asks Joe about Love Quinn, and he just warns Joe not to do anything to harm his little girl. He also asks Joe about Reese, and it's clear these Reese and Tom do not like each other and have a checkered past. Joe doesn't know what side to take on their clear rivalry, but he soon finds out that Marianne is being held prisoner by Reese. Reese tells Joe he will free Marianne when Tom is dead. Joe meets with Tom at the library one day, and Tom tells Joe that if he kills Reese, all of their problems will be solved, so we have these two dudes trying to get Joe to do their killings for him. Tom tells Joe that he can make his whole history in the States go away and he can go back to being Joe Goldberg and not have to worry about the cops arresting him, which Joe finds very tempting. To make matters even worse for Joe, Nadia is still looking into him very hard, and she is highly suspicious of him. She breaks into Joe's flat one day, he is gone, and finds a key inside a book. Joe heads to the location of Reese where Tom told him he would be and finds Reese, and ties him up demanding to know where Marianne is, and Joe chokes him out when Reese acts dumb. The episode closes with Nadia using the key that she found to open the cellar door, and when she goes down into the basement, she finds Marianne locked in the glass cage. Episode 8. Where are you going? Where have you been? This episode opens up with a flashback to earlier in the season when Joe had that run-in with Marianne and he thought he let her leave to be free. Apparently, he actually drugged her drink and tied her up because he wanted a chance to fix their relationship. She got free one day, but didn't get too far, and this resulted in Joe putting her in the glass cage. And also, Joe seems to be going through some mental problems at this point also because he denies being Joe and starts slamming his face on the cage. Over the next few weeks, Joe would bring her food and water, but as the days went on, he stopped showing up as often and just left her there to fend for herself. Luckily, Nadia discovered her before she died from thirst, but Nadia has to figure out a way to get her out of the cage as she doesn't have a key and it is bulletproof. Then we are delivered the epic twist of the season. Joe has been the Eat the Rich killer this whole time, and he created Reese as a separate personality to deal with all the guilt and murders he's committed in his life. Reese was the real mayor of the town, but never spoke a word to Joe in his life, and Joe just created the other identity modeling it after Reese's persona. Joe then realizes all of this, and he is finally accepting the reality that he is who he is, and that is never going to change. Joe then realizes he knows where Marianne is. The episode ends with Nadia and Marianne trying to figure out a way to get her out of there safely before Joe can find out. Episode 9. She's not there. Joe arrives at the location and Nadia hides before she can be seen. Joe then tells Marianne he apologizes for everything and he is going to find a way to get her out after he has his getaway plan ready. Nadia tells Marianne she will be back with a plan to neutralize Joe, but she is then arrested on subway for not paying. Joe puts his getaway plan into motion by getting a fake passport. Tom gets in touch with his daughter Kate and tells her he wants her to move to New York City and take over his business as he is about to call it quits and retire. Joe comes back to the cage and speaks with Marianne, and Marianne begs Joe to call her mother to make sure her daughter is okay. But when Joe gets her on the phone, Marianne is heartbroken to hear that her mother and daughter moved back to the United States after thinking Marianne relapsed. Joe knows he ruined Marianne's life, but he still wants to find a way to release her safely and make sure he can get away as well. Joe calms down for a bit and takes a nap, and when he wakes up, he tells Marianne he is going to let her out and deal with the consequences. But he doesn't know what the code is to the door. Joe then starts hallucinating everyone he has killed, and he may be losing his mind again. In other news, Kate tells her dad she doesn't want to follow in his footsteps and be a workaholic because she wants to be able to spend time with her children when she has them. But he continues to try and persuade her to do it. He also wants her to get away from Joe as he sees Joe as dangerous, which very fair. The episode ends with Joe going back down to the basement where it appears she has taken one too many painkillers Reese gave her a go while, and she appears dead on the floor. Joe is heartbroken. Episode 10. The Death of Jonathan Moore. Season finale. Joe then grabs Marianne and lays her body on a park bench when no one is paying attention. The real Reese's body is discovered as well, and since Tom Lockwood was the person that told Joe to kill Reese, Tom knows the truth and has leverage on Joe now. Joe is ready to just give up and end it all. He meets with Kate, and Kate tells him she doesn't think they can be together anymore because she is most likely moving to New York to take her father's spot in his company, and this just adds to the pain Joe is feeling. He considers killing Tom. Joe meets with Tom and ties him up and also kills Tom's bodyguard. John Wick out here. Joe then suffocates Tom and arranges the crime scene to make it look like the bodyguard did it. After doing so, Joe then jumps into the Thames River hoping to end it. We are then shown that Marianne didn't actually die like Joe thought, and her and Nadia planned it out together to fake her death. When Joe left Marianne on the bench, Nadia started following him all around town to see what his next move was and find conclusive evidence to put him behind bars. Back to Joe in the river, and the cops show up and rescue Joe before he can drown, and he wakes up in the hospital. Kate then shows up and sees what Joe tried doing to himself, and she tells him she wants to be with him, and she changed her mind. Once Joe gets out, he kills Edward, who was Nadia's peer, and Joe frames Nadia for the murder. She is then arrested. The episode closes with Joe and Kate still dating, and they are incredibly rich and wealthy now because she took over Tom's business after his death. The season closes with Joe receiving his son Henry back now that he is with a powerful, untouchable family in the United States. And that is it for Season 4. Hope you are able to check out Season 5 when I get it uploaded, which will be soon after it airs on Netflix. Thanks for watching.